On December 18, 1944, Task Force 38 was under the command of Admiral William Halsey. It included 7 Essex-class carriers, 6 light carriers, 8 battleships, 4 heavy, and 11 light cruisers, along with approximately 50 destroyers, conducting combat operations in and around Leyte during the late fall as part of MacArthur's promise to return to the Philippines. Many of Halsey's vessels were running low on fuel and supplies. Planning to support future operations in and around the Philippine archipelago, Task Force 38 set sail for a replenishment rendezvous point 400 miles due east to meet with fleet oilers and associated support vessels. The planned rendezvous location allowed Task Force 38's vessels to remain close to the area of operations, but safely outside of the range of ground-based Japanese aircraft. Replenishing Task Force 38 was a refueling group from the U.S. 3rd Fleet, designated Task Group 30.8, under the command of Captain Jasper T. Acuff. This flotilla consisted of oilers, fleet tugs, destroyers, and escort carriers laden with replacement airframes. Meteorology during the 1940s did not have the advantage of satellite imagery, extensive global communications, and computer modeling. Most meteorological data in those days came from weather observation aircraft, surface reports, and ship transmissions. As a result, weather forecasting was a jigsaw puzzle cobbled together from data that was usually a few hours old, dependent upon the quality of reports received and including subjective opinions or educated guesses. While naval task forces carried their own aerologist or meteorologist, fleets at sea also depended upon forecasting support from Fleet Weather Central located in Hawaii. This centralized activity provided weather support to the U.S. fleet throughout the Pacific and transmitted its reports twice a day. Given the state of meteorological observation, data gathering, forecasting, and reporting at the time, a small, tightly built typhoon or low-pressure trough could easily be missed in the vastness of the Pacific. On December 18, 1944, at 11:49, Admiral Halsey directed Commander Task Force 38 to take the most comfortable courses with wind on the port quarter. 7 minutes later, Admiral McCain directed Task Force 38 to steer a course of 120. Both were sound decisions. The storm center was then about 37 miles due north, and this southeasterly course could take the fleet away from it. But by that time, the ships were strung out over some 2,500 square miles of ocean, and it was too late for some to escape. The typhoon reached its greatest violence between 11 and 1400 on December 18th, depending on the position of the vessel concerned. At 13:45, Admiral Halsey issued a typhoon warning to alert Weather Central to what was going on. This was the first reference to the storm as a typhoon in any official language. Unknown to the commander of 3rd Fleet, he had already lost 3 destroyers. The 3rd Fleet was working in the Philippine Sea in December of 1944, carrying out air raids on Japanese airfields when it found itself in the middle of Typhoon Cobra. Some of these ships experienced sharp rolls of over 70 degrees and winds that reached 100 miles an hour. 3 of the destroyers, the Maddox, the Hickox, and the Spence, were almost depleted of fuel and so were lighter and more unstable in the rough weather. A few other destroyers, including the Monaghan and the Hull, had been refitted using over 500 tons of armament and equipment, so they were top-heavy, which also caused issues. Of these destroyers, the Hull, the Monaghan, and the Spence went down in the storm. However, the Maddox and Hickox were able to give themselves greater stability by pumping seawater into their near-empty fuel tanks. This allowed them to ride the storm out. Almost every single ship in the fleet suffered damage of some kind, mainly to radio and radar equipment. This hampered communications between the fleet, The fleet lost 146 aircraft during the typhoon. They were damaged beyond repair or blown into the sea. 9 ships in the fleet suffered damage so severe they had to be sent away to be repaired. On December 17th, the Spence prepared to refuel and pumped out all of the saltwater ballast from her tanks, but rough seas caused the refueling operation to be canceled. The next day, the weather worsened, and the storm turned into a major typhoon. Spence's electrical equipment got wet from the great quantities of seawater taken on board. After a 72-degree roll to port, all of the lights went out and the pumps stopped. The rudder jammed, and after a deep roll to port at about 11, Spence capsized and sank. Only 24 of her crew survived. Spence was struck from the Navy list on January 19th of 1945. The famed Admiral Arleigh A. Burke, who was well known for having a class of destroyers named after him, assumed command of Destroyer Squadron 23 on the 23rd of October. The squadron had become known as the Little Beavers. USS Spence DD-512 always did more than her share, wrote Admiral Arleigh Burke in 1983 of the original flagship of Destroyer Division 46, a tightly run, happy ship with a reputation for great chow, which served with distinction with Destroyer Squadron 23, the Little Beavers, until she was lost in the great typhoon of December of 1944. Rear Admiral Henry Armstrong, Spence's first commanding officer, once said of her, "Each time I hear the name USS Spence, I feel like a mother who has lost her firstborn, and being a sentimentalist, I shed a tear." The following report about USS Monaghan DD-354 is taken from DestroyerHistory.org. After training off California and Hawaii, Monaghan sailed for Ulithi on the 11th of November. There she joined the escort for 3 fleet oilers, bound for a rendezvous on the 17th of December with Task Force 38, whose plans had been striking central Luzon in support of the Mindoro invasion. The fueling day was the first day of the typhoon. There were only 6 survivors, rescued by the USS Brown after drifting on a raft for 3 days. They reported that Monaghan took roll after roll to the starboard, finally going over. The tragedy, Admiral Nimitz said, represented a more crippling blow to the Third Fleet than it might be expected to suffer in any less than a major action. Veteran of so many actions against a human enemy, the Monaghan fell victim to the sailor's oldest enemy, the perils of the sea. Prior to the typhoon, the Monaghan received an amazing 12 battle stars for her World War II service. The third ship to be sunk was the USS Hull DD-350. She was ordered to join a Third Fleet refueling group departing on November 20th of 1944 to rendezvous with the fast carrier striking forces in the Philippine Sea. Fueling operations with the fast carrier strike force in the Philippine Sea began on December 17th, but increasingly heavy seas forced the cancellation later that day. The fueling group became engulfed the next day with the approaching typhoon designated Cobra, with barometers falling to very low levels and winds increasing to above 90 knots. After the hull was ordered to change course to 140 degrees by Admiral Halsey to, quote, see what they were doing, the wind increased to over 100 knots. At about 1100 hours on the 18th of December, the point of sail became locked in irons, unable to steer, with the north wind on her port beam yawing between 80 and 100 degrees. The whaleboat and depth charges were swept off. As the roll increased to 70 degrees, she was pinned down by a gust as the sea flooded the pilot house and poured down her stacks. All hands worked feverishly to maintain integrity and keep the ship afloat during the heavy rolls, but finally, in the words of her commander, Lieutenant Commander James A. Marks, the ship remained over on her side at an angle of 80 degrees or more as the water flooded into her upper structures. I remained on the port wing of the bridge until the water flooded up to me. Then I stepped off into the water as the ship rolled over on her way down. A later finding was that additional seawater ballast could possibly have helped the ship recover from the 70-degree roll. Reportedly, some time before the hull became locked in irons, some officers debated whether or not to remove Captain Marks from his command in order to turn the ship to a safer course. But the executive officer, Greil Gertzley, refused to do so on the grounds that there had never been a mutiny on a U.S. Navy ship. This incident would provide novelist Herman Walk with the inspiration for the climax of his novel, The Caine Mutiny, in which a captain is actually relieved of his duties by his officers in the course of Typhoon Cobra. Rescue work by the USS Tabor and other ships of the fleet in the days that followed saved the lives of 7 officers, including the captain of the ship and 55 enlisted sailors. Of the men that were lost from the hull were 11 officers and 191 enlisted men. In all, 790 men from the fleet were lost during the typhoon, possibly making it the largest non-combat loss of life for a single day during the war. The subsequent court of inquiry found that Halsey had committed an error in judgment in sailing the Third Fleet into the heart of a typhoon. It stopped short of unambiguously recommending sanction or relieving him from command. It's in my humble opinion that history has perhaps at times unfairly judged Admiral Halsey for this day. After all, it's not like he had the advantage of Doppler radar or satellite imagery. He only had the reports he was given, and weather forecasting was not even 1/10 as sophisticated in those days as it is now. And even now we have trouble pinpointing exactly where a hurricane or a typhoon is going to hit until it's almost upon us sometimes. In short, he shouldn't be held accountable for an act of God, and certainly not for anything as unpredictable as a typhoon.